Hey there, I'm Dr. Zachariah Renfro, and welcome to this lecture. We're going to talk about some of the tools of arguments, and hopefully by the end of this you'll understand a little bit better how to make your own arguments better and how some more deceptive people might try and use tricky arguments to throw you off your game when you're reading their works or listening to them talk. So the first concept we're going to talk about is rhetorical force. That's the idea of certain language conveying emotional tones and certain language indicating or driving you in a certain direction. Every American, for example, has a set of secret code words that if said to them in conversation or if they read it out loud, they'll activate like some kind of sleeper agent, right? And that's kind of what this idea speaks to. So for example, some examples of words that might trigger people are things such as socialist, lower taxes, Trump, abortion, pro-choice. I put an example up here, income tax versus income theft, right? If someone says to you they support an income tax, then it's a pretty plain, non-emotive description. But if they say to you that they don't support things such as income theft, well, that completely changes the game and changes the dynamic of what they're talking about. The next rhetorical thing we'll talk about is implicature, implying. Oftentimes in arguments and discussion, people will imply certain things. If you ask a teacher how your friend's doing in class, they might not say, oh, Billy's doing terrible. They might say something such as, Billy hasn't been kicked out yet, saying that, he's not failing the class, but he's not doing so great, right? They're implying a meaning with their statement. The next thing is ambiguity. There's two types, but ambiguity means that something can have multiple meanings. The first type is lexical, which is the sentence has many meanings. So if I say to you, I'm looking for a match, that could mean that I'm looking for a small piece of wood with a flammable tip that I can use to start a fire. Or if I'm a tennis player, it might mean that I'm challenging I'm challenging you to a tennis match, right? Then there's syntactic ambiguity, which means the words have one meaning, but the sentence could have multiple meanings. Tomorrow, the government will announce that they're going to turn off the power. That could mean that tomorrow they're making an announcement about turning off the power, or it could mean that tomorrow they're going to make an announcement and turn off the power at the same time, right? So those are two types of rhetorical trickery you might face. You might face implicature and you might face ambiguity. If you're facing someone implying something, you got to make sure that as you're kind of listening to it or reading it, that you're splitting up what they mean from what they're implying, that you're breaking that apart, right? And if you're facing ambiguity of any type, you need to try and nail down exactly what they're saying in the most basic terms possible. That takes us on to the next part, and this part kind of leads together. First is primary and secondary connotation. Second is necessary and sufficient conditions for a definition. So we'll start with primary and secondary connotation. So primary connotation are the minimum requirements for something to be what it is. So in the case of a ram, right, the primary connotation is that a ram is a male sheep, right? That's the baseline, it's a male sheep. Then secondary connotation are additional factors that might relate to being a ram, such as eating grass or having horns, right? We could imagine that a ram might not have horns. Maybe its horns were sawed off, right? We could imagine that a ram has been locked in a barn its whole life and eaten nothing but potatoes, right? Maybe it doesn't eat grass, right? So the primary connotation, that's specifically what it has to have to be that thing. And then the secondary connotation are the additional things that are implied by that thing, which segues nicely into necessary and sufficient conditions for a definition. The necessary conditions are the things that it must have to be the thing. So we think of our ram. To be X, it must have X. So to be a ram, it must be a sheep and it must be male, right? That's the necessary conditions. Sufficient, they're the minimum number of conditions that must be met for it to be that thing. So we think of our ram example again. To sufficiently be a ram, it must have male and it must have sheep. It doesn't matter if it has horns, it doesn't matter if it eats grass. If it has those things, that's a nice add-on, right? But those are the sufficient conditions to be that. Which leads us nicely, and you might be thinking, okay, well, why are you explaining all this to me? Well, I'm going to tell you. Counterexamples. Say someone has given you a definition of something. Counterexample means that you are proving that something is X, but it lacks some of the conditions. So let's say, talking about our ram again, let's say that I say a ram is a male sheep with horns that eats grass. Well, you're clever. You go out and you find a ram that has been locked in a barn and only eaten potatoes, and its horns have been cut off. It had the capacity to eat grass. It had the capacity to have horns, but its horns were cut off, and it's only ever eaten potatoes. You say, my counterexample. I have a ram with no horns that does not eat grass. You have proven my definition of ram wrong. And, as you kind of think about this, you can kind of ponder some different ways which you could use those counterexamples for different definitions, right? You can only be a Star Wars fan if you've seen Star Wars 4, 5, and 6, right? Well, you could say, but my friend is a Star Wars fan and he's only seen Star Wars 1 through 5, right? So, you can kind of break that out and kind of think about how to use that. But providing counterexamples, that only works in an argument where they're giving you definitions, right? They have to be giving you a definition for that to work. Now we're moving on to some argument tricks. I'll cover 3 of them here, and then we'll move on to quantifiers. So the first argument trick is rhetorical questions. You'll see this often when people are trying to beat down an opponent in a debate. They'll say something like, why should we pay taxes? Or why should we care about our neighbors, right? The goal isn't really to ask a question. It's really meant to make their opponent seem a bit ridiculous. Same with irony. Again, we're trying to make the opponent, make the person who we're talking or reading about seem ridiculous. If you imagine you're watching TV with your grandma and then there's someone up on stage just violently twerking and grandma says, "Oh, how classy." It's probably not the case that grandma finds it to be very classy. She's just being ironic. Then we have implicitly relative sentences. This is a trick that people might use where they'll say something like, the rent is low. Low in relation to what? They'll say something like, she earns higher than many others. But who are the others? Are they people that also earn high wages? Are they people that earn low wages? What's the point of reference, right? So these are 3 different argument tricks that you might encounter. Moving on to quantifiers. They can be very vague and ambiguous, and they are usually broken down into 2 categories. You've got hard generalizations versus soft generalizations. So hard generalizations, all rams are male, right? So you've got this category of rams, and all the members of that category are males, right? And a hard generalization will include words such as all, every, no, never, always, right? They're saying that in every case related to this thing, X is Y, right? It always has this thing, right? Then next we have soft generalizations. These are a bit more forgiving. Some rams have horns, right? A ram might get its horns cut off, or it might lose its horns some way. So it could very well be the case that a ram does not have horns. So with the soft generalization, you'll see words such as some, normally, generally, in most cases, most likely, things of that nature, right? The goal of the soft generalization is to make a point about a number of the people, but not all the people, or make a point about a majority or plurality of the members of the set. So now we move on to the final section of this video, which is the various rhetorical ploys. As you can see from this very long list of them, it's a lot. And if you need to pause this video or take breaks, feel free to, because it's a lot of material to cover all at once. But as I go through these examples, I want you to try and think of maybe different commercials or advertisements or other things you might have seen that use these different rhetorical ploys. The thing to remember with rhetorical ploys is that it's not a reasoned argument. It's a technique to get you to agree to do something without necessarily having strong reasons, right? So keep that in mind. They're trying to get you to do something without reasons, right? So let's start with the appeal to fear, commonly known as scare tactics. That might be something like, if candidate X gets elected, they will destroy the country, right? The goal of this is to exaggerate any possible negative result in such a way that it brings fear into the person who sees it. Next, we've got appeal to novelty. Very simply, buy it because it's new, right? Every time they launch a new iPhone or a new Samsung Galaxy or something like that, a lot of times they're doing that appeal to novelty. You might have the iPhone 15, but you need the iPhone 16. It's new. Appeal to popularity. This, in some way, actually has a little bit of a reason, but the reason may or may not be a strong one depending on what you're doing. So the book gives us an example. Hot Picks is the #1 picture sharing app. So they're saying the reason you should get Hot Picks is because it's already the #1. Now, in some cases, something being the #1 of something is a good reason to use it, right? In a free market, we know that the things that are usually the most well supported tend to be the best for the majority of customers, right? So in this way, there is a reason, but in some cases, it might not be a very good one. Next, we have appeal to compassion. It might also be appeal to pity or appeal to guilt. You'll see this a lot with very sad TV commercials or very sad advertisements where it's got a picture of maybe a sad dog or a starving child or someone in the hospital, and it's trying to get you to donate money or to buy something, with the implication being that if you donate or buy this thing, that it will relieve whatever this sad thing is that you're seeing on TV. Then we have appeal to cuteness. So think about diaper commercials or things like that, where, they got like a really cute baby and they're doing something adorable, right? So that's appeal to cuteness. Then on the other side, we've got appeal to sexiness. So think about perhaps a beer commercial. It's got a bunch of very beautiful people all having fun, right? So the implication is if you buy this beer, you are going to be around these beautiful people having fun. Next, we have appeal to wealth or status, power, hipness, coolness. They're all kind of grouped together. You see this a lot in luxury commercials or commercials for luxury products, right? They're trying to appeal to that idea of having status and power and being separated off from the masses. Then we have appeal to ridicule. This is actually kind of in a different vein. So with appeal to ridicule, you are showing that something's ridiculous, therefore you shouldn't do it. Where all these are trying to get you to do something, appeal to ridicule is trying to get you to not do something, right? Voting for candidate X is a waste of a vote, so they're saying it's ridiculous. So that's the first set of rhetorical ploys. As you can see, these are very commonly used in advertisement. Now moving on to the second set of rhetorical ploys, and these are still used in advertising, but you'll see some of them are used more towards argumentation. So the first one you'll see in advertisement is direct attack, buy tea, eat beef. It's short, it's sweet, it's simple. You get straight to the point. Do this. They don't even give reasons. They just say do it. Like Nike, just do it, right? Scare quotes. I'm sure he has reasons for his policy. In some way, you're trying to make whatever it is seem ridiculous or seem suspicious, right? So you are taking something that normally wouldn't be controversial. I'm sure he has reasons for his policy. Then you're adding a little quotation in there. I'm sure he has reasons. Trading on equivocation. Now, the book had this, and I thought it was just kind of a clever thing, right? The new diesel Go car is environmentally friendly because it uses no gas. So when people hear environmentally friendly car, they might think of an electric car, but in this case, it's referring to a diesel car. But they're hoping that they're hoping that the viewer doesn't think that far ahead to realize, like, oh, this is also a internal combustion engine vehicle, right? Then we've got trading on implicature. When talking about maybe a tax increase, tax increases are a burden on working families. The policy being discussed might only affect families earning $1 million who also work, right? Maybe they're a couple of CEOs, married CEOs or something. But when they say the phrase tax increases burden working families, you don't think of a working CEO. You think of, old Joe who's a mechanic, or Billy who's putting tiles down, right? Then we've got leading questions. These are questions that when they're posed to you, so we've switched away from, advertisements almost completely, and now we're getting into argumentation, right? So leading question, this is a question that if you respond to it, you're accepting one of their premises. So if they say, why do you smell so bad? If you answer that, then you are accepting the assumption that you smell bad, right? It's a bit of a trick. So keep an eye out for that, because sometimes people do it. They'll say, well, why are you so ugly? If you respond, well, then you've accepted the premise that you are ugly, right? Then we've got changing the subject. Again, very easy to do. We see this a lot in politics. They get up there, they get asked a question about flag burning, and then they go off on a tangent about domestic extremism, right? Well, that doesn't relate to flag burning. It just shifted the focus, right? Now we get into 4 things that are really closely related together, but, they kind of get thrown in at the end, so we'll cover them here. Buzzwords. You'll see this a lot. If you go on LinkedIn, everyone's got their favorite buzzwords, right? Things like synergy or change, freedom, positive management, whatever. They've all got these buzzwords, so just keep your eyes out for that. Buzzwords are trying to either convey a complex idea, or they're trying to show that they're part of some kind of in-group, which you are not a part of if you don't get the buzzwords right. Same with jargon. It's just a type of slang. They even give it a special term, jargon, but it's just slang specific to a group. So in office culture, you see the phrase giving someone a heads up. That's jargon, it's slang. Then we've got acronyms. You'll see this a lot in business or in the military. They love their acronyms. Sometimes they'll have an acronym for an acronym. You got the alphabet soup, FBI, CIA, DEA, DHS, EPA, all these different random letters that mean something. And in business, you'll see something like, we'll meet our KPIs. And FY 2025, we'll meet our key performance indicators in fiscal year 2025. A lot of times when they're saying these things, they're trying to show how smart they are and trying to show that they're in the know, right? And then spin, this is the final topic. It's rephrasing something to make it sound better than it is. So if you remember the bank that happened a little over a decade ago now, they said they were injecting liquidity into the banks when in reality they were just giving them money. Now, if you're pitching a policy to the voters, do you want to say, let's give these banks that screwed up the economy a bunch of money? Or do you want to say, let's inject liquidity to save working families, right? So it's taken something and completely changing the wording of it in such a way that people don't notice what you've done. So those were rhetorical ploys. I hope that this lecture on argumentation has been helpful to you. I hope that it helps you better understand some of the different words, phrases, or things that people will say when they are arguing, debating, having advertisements, etc. I know it's a lot. It's a lot to try and make and cover. Let me know what you think. Has this helped you understand how advertising and argument works? Does this give you a better insight into how other people try to influence your actions? Leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're one of the students in my class, please talk about it in the forums. I really want to know what you think. And thank you so much for your time. You have a wonderful day.